Well, many thanks indeed for staying with us here on TVC Breakfast. Let's get into our first conversation, shall we? Floods have become a perennial challenge in Nigeria, leaving it into wake destruction of property, displacement, and even death. But despite the experiences gained over the years on the intensity and areas prone to floods, many residents still fall victim. According to the 2022 annual flood outlook, predicted that high flooding will hit 233 local government areas in 32 states and the Federal Capital Territory. And this is why government at all levels and individuals have been charged by environmentalists to take proactive measures to mitigate against foreseeable hazards ahead of the impending floods, as predicted, especially going into September this year. Let's have that conversation now. Joining us live here in the studio is Philip Jakpo, Director of Programs, Corporate Accountability and Public Participation, Africa, CAPA. Thank you so much, Philip, for agreeing to speak with us here on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you.
How worrying is this prediction to start with?
Well, I think the starting point is to commend NIMET and the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency, which has been very, very consistent in alerting Nigerians to, what has become a recurrent decimal. We say this because I think 2012 had the worst floods. We had the worst floods. Well, as at that time, the worst floods in 40 years. And virtually all the states of the Federation were affected. People died. I think nearly 400 people died across board. Farmlands lost. So it will seem that 2012 took us by storm. But ever since, NIMET, has been very precise in terms of, alerting Nigerians, alerting government on what to do, what to expect. So for people like us, this prediction is worrying, but at the same time, it has been happening, over and over again. The only unfortunate thing to this is once NIMET warns like this, it is expected that you have, federal and state level interventions to ensure that, our people do not suffer too much. But unfortunately, year in, year out, our people suffer, farmlands are lost, people die, there are displacements. State governments start talking about ecological funds when there are some things they can do which they refuse to do. So it's worrying in that sense because these things can be addressed.
What do you think the cultural aspects of our lives have contributed to these floods?
Well, traditionally, of course, we have a lot of our people who live in these riverine areas. The Jaw people, for instance, the LGAs, they live along the coastline. Most of them are typically fisher folks. In fact, they depend in Warri, the Jaws in Warri, Shekiri, some of the Shekiri. So this is what we are. But climate change and the kind of industrialization processes we have adopted has made it imperative that even though our people live on the coastlines and these things happen year in, year out, what you expect government to do, I think that's when we want to start talking of solutions, for instance, is that we are supposed to have government at state level start looking at, for instance, building shelters on high ground where people can relocate to when these things happen. And then maybe after the floods recede, they go back because these people typically live on the coastline areas. But unfortunately, like I said,
they refer to that as their ancestral homes.
Yes, of course, it is. And that's why I said
that's why I talk about the culture.
Yes.
So where do you now say, well, this is my ancestral home. This is where my father worshipped. My father lived and worshipped his gods. So how do I move from this place that was so sacred to me to a new place? But I don't have any new place to go because there's somebody else who owns the land. So I have to live and die here.
Well, that again, a lot of education is important, but truly, these are ancestral lands that belong to people. Yeah. And so we have to recognize that, we have to respect that. And then how do we manage the situation? And that's why issues of, like I mentioned earlier, building, shelters where they can move to,
when the
floods come. And then after the floods, maybe they go back. But for those who are, because climate change is a reality as we know today, it's happening not only in Warri, not only in larger areas of, even in Lagos here, if you go to Okonafa, the Elegushi area, it's a disaster. I was there some 2 or 3 weeks ago. Even as I said yesterday, the information we are getting is that, about 500 meters of original land is now under the waters. And what is causing this, of course, we know of the climate change, which causes, of course, sea level rise, but also there are a lot of activities going on within that Lekki, Ajah corridor, which is exacerbating, what is happening there. Community people tell you that, for instance, the Eco-Atlantic, a lot of water is diverted to, that axis, and then you have some companies along the, shoreline who are also doing a lot of things.
A lot of magic was done in the Eco-Atlantic area. It was, for those people who did not know, that place was going to take over the Lagos Island. The water was going to take over Lagos Island. Was all those places where you have IMB, used to have
exactly,
Babbage Road.
Yes.
All the values of the properties, can you imagine, VI, nobody wanted to go there, but the value was
going down.
And everything was a lot of trouble for Lagos at that time, before Lagos took charge under the Asiwaju Bola Tinubu. But what happened is that place has now been converted into huge cash cow for the economy. So how do we turn these things? Lagos has been able to do that in that axis, which is even the U.S. Embassy is trying to get a big buildings in that place, which is going to give you. Somebody said the money that you could get from there is about $1 billion, which is more money than many states put together, can generate at that time. Just that small plot of land as it were. So, are we thinking in the national sense, or how we can convert this into opportunity rather than lamentation?
Well, I think one thing we must look at is, while we talk of revenue, talk of what we can generate, we must also look at the ordinary people. Like I said, I've been to Elegushi, and most of those people tell you that their forefathers have been there.
So how do you do that?
And now government, those projects are trying to displace them. Can government start discussing with them about how to relocate and actually compensate, proper compensation? I think that is the discussion.
Is compensation
with
even
those people?
It's compensation enough. Remember the people who live on stills, the Makoko.
Those
people don't want to live there. Even if you give them compensation, they said that is where they have. It's difficult to remove them because it's not so much about giving them a new place to go to. It's so much about this is where we know, this is where we want to stay.
But that's where government has to be government. You have to really discuss with them. I think if people see the benefits, real tangible benefits, because those places, Makoko, for instance, they are floating schools. So they have schools there, they have their churches there, they have their mosques there.
Their businesses.
Their businesses there. So if we can ensure that those kind of things that they are used to, they can get it elsewhere. I think that discussion...
You know why that is difficult? Because they fish there. If you take them from there, take them to land, what are they going to get? They don't know, they have said that. They said, look, my great-grandfather was a fisherman. So you want to take me out of this, you give me school, okay. You give me good house.
Yes.
There won't be environmental problem. I've not complained about environmental problem. My people are dying, but we love it so.
Okay, teach them aquaculture.
Aquaculture.
Teach them aquaculture. Let them have fish ponds. where they can, yes, so...
Fish pond, I don't want fish pond. There's nothing they have not discussed with them.
That's an alternative.
Fish pond and fishing are not the same thing. Because it's also a culture. You want to wake up, you want to get on your canoe, you want to hold your paddle, you want to go in the morning, you want to smell the air in the morning, you want to breathe. Yes, it's a very difficult, that's why I say culture. Culture is the greatest impediment to development.
Yes, but then again, you must, that's why we also have those traditional institutions. I think the discussion
should continue.
The discussion will not, I think there's a community in is it Boma or something like that, or Koma, I can't remember the name exactly, in River State, where there was something like this, and they had to, even their shrine, the shrine had to be provided for them, so that they can...
You have to displace the gods.
The gods.
You have to relocate the gods. You have to relocate the gods.
Even the gods.
Yes,
the worship was relocated.
They agreed.
They agreed.
Yes, sometimes you bribe them. I heard that there was one time they were trying to construct a road somewhere in the Niger Delta. And then the people said, you cannot construct this road here. This is where our God is. You cannot do anything there. The priests were all arguing. But I think eventually what happened was that bribe was more important than the spirit. So when they collected money, then you bribe the gods.
All right. Yeah, but yeah. So this is just the reality. So we need a lot of synergy. So it's beyond even just the riverine communities. It's a whole broad discussion that will involve, like I mentioned earlier, while NIMET and the Hydrological Services Agency, they are doing a lot of work. You also need, the Ministry of Water Resources, Ministry of Agriculture. These agents. So rather than the Ministry of Water Resources talking about water resources bill, I think the focus should be on the roles they can also play to ensure that, for instance, when the 2012 flooding happened, one of the reasons why, beyond the fact that we had beyond normal rains, the dam, Lagdo Dam in Cameroon, there was a threat that it could breach.
All right.
And
Philip, we'll continue with those thoughts of yours, but let's just take a moment. We'll be back in just a moment as we continue the conversation on flooding here in Nigeria. Stay with us. We're back in just a moment. Well, thanks for staying with us. This is TVC Breakfast, and of course, we're staying on this very disturbing issue of flooding here in Nigeria, and of course, predictions and warnings from NIMET. Well, Philip is here with us. Philip, just a moment ago, we're going to mention the role that neighboring countries play in this issue of the torrential rains and floods, because it appears that in part, some of this is also attributed to the neighboring countries around us.
We'll go back again, for instance, to the 2012 floods. That year, for instance, we had beyond normal rains. And there was a likelihood that the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon was going to maybe break apart. And of course, that will mean real disaster. And so waters had to be released gradually. But when that dam was built in 1979, the agreement was that Nigeria was going to build buffer dams, smaller dams, to assimilate water. The Lagdo Dam is uphill, we are down, And between 1979 and now, nothing was done. So those buffer dams, small dams, because huge dams can constitute a real problem when there's
So it's not been done up to now?
And so that was what caused, the level of flooding we experienced that year. I was in Lokoja.
Has it been done now?
No, that problem is still there. So if we have the kind of rains we had in 2000 with this climate change thing, if we had the kind of rains we had that year, we are likely going to face the same kind of problems. I was in Lokoja. Lokoja was the epicenter of the flooding that year, and it was a disaster. People were displaced. People were running from their homes because apart from the water, snakes were everywhere, and even the shelters, emergency shelters that came up, could not accommodate a lot of people. So those are the kind of things, like I mentioned, that the Ministry of Water Resources, Ministry of Works should be looking at. Ministry of Water Resources should leave the issue of the water resources bill that is promoting and look at, what we can do in that respect, And then, like I mentioned earlier, state-level interventions. What the states are quick to do is to talk about ecological funds for some little things that they can do. I've mentioned the issue of shelters. People are building on wetlands. People are building on floodplains, and I think that's one major problem because these wetlands are supposed to be the buffer when you have the flood, so water can always find its level. Water will always find its level, and that's why we have the kind of problems we have today. And in all this, the average person, me and you, are left to carry across when these floods cause displacements. I think 2 years ago when we had the major flooding in Lagos, cars, nobody has asked what happened to those cars, how the people, everybody, to your tent. And that is the kind of things that result when you have
So if we don't take precautionary measures, for instance, if we don't, you've mentioned the fact that there was an agreement that was supposed to provide buffer dams.
Build buffer dams,
so many years ago, 1979. Yes. It's not been built yet.
Yes.
We have the climate change just around us now, of course, around the world, and of course, Nigeria is not left out of it. I wonder what you fear the most. What do you see coming?
I think the Intergovernmental Panel report on climate change, that of 2022, which was released earlier in the year, predicted that we're going to have more of this kind of, disasters. And that's my fear. So what, like my senior colleague, what he mentioned earlier about the IMB Bar Beach, some of us grew up in Lagos. I was born here in Lagos. I know of the Bar Beach. But I'm sure most kids of today, when you talk about Beach,
they don't know anything.
They don't know anything about the Bar Beach. It has disappeared. Alpha Beach that we're talking about, the Okonafa axis, in 2012, I did some field work there, and then there were still coconut trees. It is no longer there. Yeah. It's going. So what is the situation going to be like in the next 5, 6, 10 years? So you are going to, if care is not taken, we will all be submerged. But the climate impacts are not even limited only to coastal, flooding, the sea level rise. There's also desertification up north. There are 11 frontline states of the north that are, the desert is coming. The Atlantic is pushing us. So it's most likely all of us will meet in the middle. And
it's a terrible thing. This global warming.
Exactly.
It's not only that we are having floods, which is a result of the melting of the ice cap.
Yes.
But we also have dryness coming.
Exactly.
The U.S. made a big deal about the Colorado River, which was, really rich and big and massive. And then the things has dried up, and they have been seeing some crime specimens. Somebody was murdered, and they didn't see him for decades. They saw the body, they saw the wounds, they saw everything. They saw. You see that in this world we are moving towards some kind of apocalypse.
Exactly.
As we're going. So what can we do? When I was small, people were talking about desert encroachment. I thought it was just a fanciful thing, in the north. No, the Lake Chad we are talking about today was a big mass of water, and it was a source of big commercial activity around Borno State, where people were doing really good stuff.
Yes.
And some people say part of the problem in the Northeast. Exactly. It's traced to the fact that there's no more water. Exactly. It has led to impoverishment of a lot of people whose lives and livelihoods depended on the water.
In fact, I can amplify that. We are told that the Lake Chad was about 25,000 square kilometers in 1963. It is today it is about 1,500 square kilometers today. So the millions of people, like you mentioned, who depended on it, for fishing, pastorists, they started moving,
moving south. I had one auntie who used to live in Maiduguri. They came to join us in Ibadan.
Exactly. So it's a disaster.
Yes. Let me ask about the issue of how we keep records and data. about this kind of issues. I wonder what your analysis or evaluation would be. Because take for instance, I think it was last month here in Lagos, I think around the Orile Agege area, there was a flooding there, and the report as to, oh, this one person died, two persons died, or one person. So I think there's also something about our records and data keeping, and even how we report issues around flooding.
Well, what you are doing, for instance, is also educating people, and it will help people to start keeping records. The issue of NIMET we mentioned earlier, for instance, they started off with just what happened, the press briefing where they announced that there's going to be floods in 32 states. But now they are also going a step further. They are engaging farmers who live in some of these areas. So there are clusters they send text message to. So these are all things that have to do with technology. So records are being kept. I don't think there's much problem with that. The statistics about what happened in 2012, for instance, is in the public domain. What government expended, a committee that was set
Actual
up, that
figures,
things like that. Those things are in the public. Yeah, but to a large extent, where you have the real issue is the fact that we have simply not started looking at, flood risk management in our planning. We are so much into, okay, it has happened, okay, relief materials, and the recourse always quickly to ecological funds for what, some little things that states can prove. How many states can you mention, for instance, that have, shelters always there for these kind of things, rather than the ad hoc, thing that always happens? It's either people are left to their fate, or there's these ad hoc measures that I remember when I visited Lokoja, one of the camps where you had these displaced persons, there were about 300 families, and there were just 2 toilets. And you have women, you have men, you have people who are physically challenged, all sharing, just 2 toilets. So at the end of the day, even people who are displaced end up, living wherever they are moved to, with different ailments and things like that. But that is another discussion. I think the crucial thing is how we can, states can start becoming more responsive to the warnings that NIMET give. The warnings are not just for, cosmetics. It is for states to take actions. So now what we expect states to be doing is opening up the drains, opening up the drains. And then we should start looking at the culture, because most of the drains they open today, what you see, they are plastics. Yeah. Is the kind of industrialization model that we have embraced. But you see the drains are, jammed with plastics, different kind of waste. So a lot of education, our people should be educated.
Once it just starts raining in some areas, it's like, oh yeah, pack all your debts.
There was this video or picture of, so I think somewhere in Surulere, when there was this heavy flood, and everywhere it was just plastics. So a lot of education and concrete intervention in terms of, urban planning. So these are the kind of things that we expect state governments to do. We cannot really confront the climate crisis, but we can play some crucial roles in mitigating,
which is a very important issue. Where will our efforts end, and where does nature prevail?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, there are some concessions. It looks like inevitable. I don't know whether it is possible for us to conquer nature. Because what is happening is that nature is coming with ferocity. The ice cap is melting faster than people thought it was. It was going to, and places, the heat is also coming at a great stop. I mean, people are even arguing now that we are going to get into an age of water diplomacy, where water, so the powers in the world are going to be those who have more water than others. And technology is probably going to be brought into play to try to make water for us, because as it is now, some parts of the world may have more advantage in terms of having water than others. And so we are not in that area where the poet Corey said, "Water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink."
Yes.
Yeah, this one there may be water, water in some places, and a few people have water to drink.
Oh my God. You have emphasized the next wars for the next generation,
next
which is water.
Which water, yeah.
We actually have to go now. Maybe in 20 seconds, help us with some safety tips when we find ourselves confronted with flooding.
That is that's a big one. Well, we learn from the example of what we've seen, especially with the recent floods that happened. We use Lagos as an example. And
submerged.
So that readily comes to my mind. What you can do if you are driving, for instance, and there's flood ahead, what you just do, park and get out to high ground.
All right.
Don't try to brave it. You can't. Water will always find its level.
Don't try to do what you see in movies.
Exactly.
Philip Jacko, thank you so much for speaking with us here on TVC Breakfast as the Director of Programs of Corporate Accountability and Public Participation Africa. Kappa, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.